I'm just going to wait until the actual thing says that we have started. Come on. All right, and we're finally live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Nationalist Academy. I am one of the three Ghostbusters. I am Charles Murray, and I am joined by a guest. We're missing the other Ghostbusters today. Tom has gone on some kind of spirit quest, and Uber, even though he said he'd show up, isn't here. Hopefully, he might come on later, and I am joined by a guest. Why don't you say hi and introduce yourself?
Hello, I am O.W. Von Dietz. I am simply a student, I believe, I guess, of psychology and philosophy.
OW is fine, just calling you?
Yeah. I mean, you can call me, O.W. or Von Dietz, either one. It's fine.
All right. All right, OW, and you can call me Cole, of course. If Uber shows up, you can call him Uber, and Tom is gone probably forever. I have no idea where he disappeared to, but
He went on a spirit quest. I'm actually quite interested in that.
he did. It was one of our last few communications. It's either that either he's going on a spirit quest or he's having trouble with his girlfriend. One of the two. Those were pretty much the last two things that we talked about. He mentioned that he wanted to try to get more into the spiritualistic side of politics, and he was, studying more into the kind of Evolian Kali Yuga kind of stuff and embracing a guru persona. And he also mentioned that he was having trouble with his girlfriend, and that I would understand, and of course I do. So for the beginning of our shows, we always give a review of the particular books that we do. Now, these reviews aren't whether you should read or not. Every single book that we bring on, of course, we assume it's worthwhile. We're never going to come on the show and say, hey, this book is absolutely terrible, let me talk about it. My book for this episode was Irrational Man by William Barrett, and it's basically a summary of the history of existentialism. It goes through it chronologically, and the particular areas that I took focus in was the contrast between Kierkegaard and Nietzsche. Now, here, and I'll talk more about Nietzsche in a little bit after the book. I really do enjoy it because it's different than analytical philosophy, and it goes back, to the very beginning from, Plato and Aristotle, and many of our differences in philosophy seem to just ornate from these two, even though there were several more before him. Dionysius wasn't before him, I believe. What is his name? It begins with H, but no one ever reads because it deals with like platonic solids and everything like that. But
oh, I know what you're talking about. What is his name?
I think it was like Herosius or something.
It's definitely not Herodotus, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm. But anyways, getting back to it, it begins with this contrast between Aristotle and Plato, and it goes on from there into their various works and summarizing each of their works. A lot of, in the basic chronology, goes like this. It begins with ancient Greek versus Hebraism, as they call it, basically the ancient Hebrew form of philosophy of the existentialism. Then it goes into Christianity, and after Christianity, I believe it starts getting into the French pre-existentialists, and then it goes into Kierkegaard, Heidegger, and Nietzsche, and so on. But I don't exactly agree completely with their contrast between Hebraism and Hellenism, because the way that they kind of portray Hebraism, and honestly, it's a bit of more of a bias towards my thing, and many people in the alt-right will agree with them that Hebraism is kind of a foreign ideology. It's a foreign thinking to ourselves, and that
it's certainly not European, that's for sure.
Exactly, but and this book kind of has a very similar position to that. It's basically taking the position that what we perceive as the Semitic moralities that we read, and they're basically saying we're reading it into the Old Testament, that it's actually completely different than what we're reading in. And the distinction that they're making is the difference between practice and with knowledge. And here is a quick little 2 sentence summary that I think sums it all up in the respective chapter. Right conduct is the ultimate concern of the Hebrew. Right thinking is that of the Greek. Duty and strictness of conscience are the paramount things in the life of the Hebrew. For the Greek, the spontaneous and luminous play of intelligence. The Hebrew thus extols the moral virtues as the substance and meaning of life. The Greek subordinates them to the intellectual virtues. I I do I disagree with this because we can find in many Old Testament works, I believe, not in Song of Solomon, it's the other poetic verse, Ecclesiastics, I believe it is, and we kind of find it's not even a proto version. In a way, it's kind of a parallel version to what I think it's Rousseau who said it, that God
Jean-Jacques Rousseau, right? We're just talking the same guy.
Yeah.
Okay, just making sure on the same page.
Yeah, Rousseau. I believe it was Rousseau. It was one of the Enlightenment scientists, not necessarily existentialist thinkers, but he said surely God must favor intelligence or knowing over ignorance, and I think that we can actually find that in the book of Ecclesiastics, and that's where I believe they drew this notion of God surely must love the knowledgeable more than the ignorant. I believe in Ecclesiastics, there are passages that goes into the great marvels of the world and knowing, the function and I believe they phrase it, the movements of God throughout the world. This is a clear sign that it's something external to them, that it's something to marvel at. It's not necessarily this internal concept of I know what is good and therefore I'm going to act upon it. It's they're kind of contrasting it with a kind of like hollowness that as long as you act good, it doesn't matter what you know, because you can never be fully knowledgeable. You will be ignorant, therefore it's not worthwhile. I think you can actually extrapolate that there is a form within it of knowledge is good because knowledge of God is good. But I want to get into the later few chapters that are Heidegger is very important too, but contrasting between Nietzsche and Kierkegaard. And the more and more I read into Nietzsche, the more and more I just flat out don't like his philosophy. I mean,
really, I'm a huge fan of Nietzsche. Although, to be fair, when looking at, and obviously not to interrupt your review here, but specifically speaking on the Enlightenment, right, and the philosophy of the Enlightenment period between, obviously, we were talking about Rousseau and Kant. I think we mentioned earlier, but that was before we started recording. It's very important to note from the Enlightenment what paths the different nations took after that, right, and the direction of the philosophy from the evolution of philosophy out of the Enlightenment period into the different nation states, specifically the contrasting differences between that of England, France, and Germany. And this is obviously like you'd have Nietzsche as the big one from Germany.
From what I understand, the Germanics almost rejected in comparison. I believe the French and Anglos, they had a kind of competition between the two about the values of equality versus liberty, and they each had their own criticisms. But from what I understand, the Germanic perspective sought to, as Nietzsche would put it, to overcome it, to move kind of like past it, like after the death of God, to become the Übermensch, as he would say. While the Enlightenment sought more equality and liberty, the Übermensch seeks to rise above the equality and liberty and such. He's his own liberator, and he makes equal what he wills to be.
In a sense, yes, and specifically because it's an evolution. Like the Germanic process of philosophical thought was very much an evolutionary process, unlike the English and French, where it was more of a as I forgot who said it. I think it was God, who was it that said we must tear down the old house of knowledge? It wasn't Hobbes. God, who was it? Anyway, it was an English philosopher that said it, but I forgot his name.
Maybe Paine?
No, it wasn't. It wasn't Paine. It was man, for her life, I can't. I'll remember later. But they said that they needed to tear down the old house of knowledge. It was very much instead of a fluid evolution like it was in the Germanic concepts, it was a replace with something different or a new conceptual thought process. It was, and as you were saying earlier, it was a battle between them, right? And it wasn't specifically just a battle between the philosophers of France and England, but it was a battle between the philosophers within France and England, right? So that they each were comparing and contrasting each other's works to the point where they were kind of in competition with one another for who can be, the most this or the most that. Where in Germany, it was very much a linear progression from Kant to Nietzsche, ultimately culminating in the realization and actualization and manifestation of National Socialism, specifically with philosophical psychology. Seeing itself a lot with Schopenhauer, which is one of my favorites. Probably my favorite philosopher from Germany, who was the precursor to Nietzsche. And then you had before Schopenhauer, you had men like Kant and Hegel and Heidegger and all these other guys. So it was all very progressive. Like each one never rejected the previous's work, the man that came previously to him or the man that came prior to him's work. They never did that like they did with other ones. Like you saw a lot of, especially in England and with France, they would do a lot of rejection, a ton of rejection of the men who came before them and say, okay, these men were wrong and for such and such reasons, and this is why I'm right, or this is why this new method is better for the world or mankind in general. Where in the Germanic concepts, it was very much okay, they did this. Now how do we improve this, right? Like this is correct, but time frame within its concept and within its context. And they just simply, it was like a building block concept. It was very much so a linear progression of the Faustian spirit, really, where you had the original writings of Goethe, although Goethe wasn't a philosopher, right? He was simply a literary genius. And they took those same concepts throughout the entirety of Germany at the time. The entirety of the philosophy and the sociological aspects of the civilization was a very linear and cohesive progression to get to the aspects of the Übermensch, to get to the aspects of the will to power. And before the will to power, I actually did a podcast with one of my friends about this, specifically about the concepts of the will to power and how they related with Schopenhauer and Nietzsche. And it was originally with Schopenhauer, who predated Nietzsche, and where Nietzsche got the majority of his ideologies from. Again, it was a linear progression. It was a building of Schopenhauer's work on the denial of the will to life, or things of that nature, right? Where he would write on, which pretty much like denial of the will to life, or specifically the will to life. There's a bunch of different terminologies that he utilizes, but all it pretty much does culminate to, if taken to its logical conclusion, or a scientific conclusion or a natural origin conclusion, the more and more knowledge that we obtained, the more and more that his ideologies would have grown into exactly what Nietzsche would have put on paper, which is the idea that a will to power is the only way to remove oneself from nihilism. So a lot of people, whenever they read Nietzsche's work, they always seem to get caught up in this specific aspect of nihilism and then leave it at that, never furthering to the point where the will to power is the actualization of the nihilistic aspect, and then bringing yourself up from that. As you were saying earlier, that the individual is responsible for their well-being, right? For the betterment of themselves. It's the individual's responsibility. The will to power is pretty much one pulling themselves up by their own bootstraps out of the well of nihilism. And so it's the very much progression to that, where you have the philosophy of it and the application of it was National Socialism.
And thank you for that contribution. Only one small correction was that Heidegger was actually after Nietzsche, not before him. But
wait, Martin Heidegger was? Oh yes, sorry. Did I say Hegel or Heidegger?
I thought you said both. I thought you said Schopenhauer, Heidegger, Hegel, and I think you mentioned one other, but I thought you mentioned four of them.
Oh, sorry, no, I meant to say Kant and Hegel. If I said Heidegger, I'm sorry.
Well, anyways, back onto my point is I really, and it comes down to this question of tackling nihilism, and I made a kind of funny tweet a few weeks ago that I think perfectly summarized it up. So it's basically a person who runs up to Nietzsche and and Kierkegaard, and they say, "Help! I'm succumbing to nihilism and losing faith." Nietzsche, on one hand, says you need to abandon everything and replace the meaning of life with the will to gaining more power. Because God is dead, but we need what God provides. We must become our own personal gods, defining what we need. While Kierkegaard just, he just says, just become religious, my nigga. I mean, he provides such a more simple answer. Instead of God being dead, all you need to do is just simply restore your faith in God. And he puts being religious in something more than, just a blind faith. But it's honestly quite amazing.
He uses it kind of as a tool, which I kind of disagree. Well, I would reject that concept of if one is to have faith, and utilizing faith as a tool kind of negates faith in and of itself, which again, that's kind of one of the big issues I have with Kierkegaard. Although he has a really great concepts, it doesn't really make logical sense at the baseline, where if one is to have and put faith in something, one simply cannot use it simply as a tool to restore. Like, you can't use faith as a tool to restore faith, right? You can't have faith. It seems redundant and cyclical. It doesn't seem to actually, like, I don't know. It's like a snake eating its tail. It doesn't seem to work out logically.
Well, we'll get into that in a bit, but let me just quickly finish my my summary of them. So Nietzsche is, I kind of view him as, I do think he's smart, but I just really don't like his approach to things. Even though this is existentialism and not analytic philosophy, I greatly, I guess, appreciate that analytic philosophy kind of approach to it. I like the concept of, premise, conclusion. I love Kant, because what he does with his arguments is he starts out with a premise that you'll most likely agree with, something that's a priori, or something that's innately this to be true. It's so obvious that this is true, and then following a logical progression of, if this is true, then, and if that is true, then, and going so on from that. But reading Nietzsche, one of the things that just got under my skin, and Kant is a big bias of mine, there's only two sentences that he puts forward to debunk Kant. One is, he says Kant's moral philosophy is Tartuffery, and then he goes on to slightly explain it more, saying he made the revolution of making the intent the important part of action. We must go a step further and make both intent and consequence important part of the action. And those are like the only two sentences regarding it. And I'm just like, you're not starting without any premise. He's writing more like just kind of like a column writer. He's going against what I like in terms of form. Now, that can be excused if it's actual good stuff, but when you look into his actual premises of God being dead and such like that, it's a false premise of not an understanding God being dead. It's not so much that we've disproved God or anything. It's, if you asked him what he meant by the death of God, he would meant just this loss of spirituality, this loss of just religious faith. And as Kierkegaard would say, then you just need to restore the religious faith. You don't need to create your own thing.
I would take it more that we've outgrown God, I think, is what he was going for on that one. Is that, yes, the spirituality is now lacking in civilization, but also that we've outgrown him.
Yeah, but the problem is, he wouldn't say we've outgrown him. He would say what spirituality provides is an absolute necessary thing for humanity to exist. And therefore, his whole
spirituality and God aren't necessarily the same thing. Specifically in the Germanic concepts, where they've grown towards that, where you have this very specific distinctions between. It's also, I hate to say it, but it's like, it's better to read these in the original language, because the terms that they utilize are very contextual, and they're specific, right? There's a lot of words in German that you can't translate into English without putting like a paragraph with it, right? Mm-hmm. That specific thing where, God, I've lost my train of thought. I'm sorry. Continue.
Mm-hmm. All right, and let me see. We're or was I? Oh yeah. So it's just coming from this opposite premise of, you know, God being dead, he can't be our maker of morals anymore. Therefore, and he goes into this thing. But if it's kind of not in line with my thing. So if I'm looking for, you know, premise conclusion, you need a self-evidently obvious premise to go forward and say, to conclude therefore, and then you could say, oh, I follow that argument. But with Nietzsche, he starts with this premise that you know, I just can't agree with. I don't see the decline of spirituality. In fact, I see it's just kind of, you could say it's become commercialized with it being more widespread, but for the true believers out there, I don't see it actually declining. And that's why I say that Kierkegaard has the right idea. He's saying, yes, that society around us is becoming less religious. Yes, we are falling into materialism and nihilism and just having your religion as a shoulder patch and doing nothing more with that. But in order to combat that, instead of saying we need something else to replace it, it's saying, no, you need to go back to the roots and understand what it actually is. You need to understand actually what God is. If you say you're a follower of God, you can't just, you know, have this surface level thing. So that's why I really disagree with with Nietzsche in this. And that gets into the second part, is the problem with the conception of the Übermensch, going beyond good and evil and enacting the will to power as the reason to live, power being not a means but an ends unto itself. I think he is very smart and everything like that, but I think the way whenever he talks about and gives concrete examples of what the Übermensch is or how the Übermensch behaves, and I could be wrong. I could be wrong on this. Like, a lot of people have studied Nietzsche a lot more than me, but it seems to me that what he does, and I think this actually plays into his philosophy cleverly, is because he wants each individual to become the arbiter of their own morals, to become the Übermensch, he leaves Übermensch specifically vague enough so you can kind of project your own what should the overman be into this, so I can be an ideal to aspire to, someone who rises beyond the 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 frivolous moral, you know, hang-ups of the society around you when you overcome it. But without this lack of an objective morality and just power being the only thing good unto itself, it kind of you could read into it a lot, way too much for it to be an objective thing. So funnily enough, when I'm thinking about this, one of the few people that I think is actually that have achieved kind of an Übermensch through ignorance in a kind of way. It's a contradictory thing because the Übermensch is a solitary lone thinker is one of the quotes about the Übermensch, but like Jake and Logan Paul, through a kind of funnily enough, through a kind of ignorance, they've kind of risen above, you know, the common morals of society, and what they do is just to, you know, spread their own popularity and influence. And as long as that isn't their actual kind of their goal to be more popular, but to have popularity be the ends unto itself, to be their means to power, I could see a justification of just someone who is not materialist in the sense of shallow, but materialist of only like respecting the material world and gaining power in this material world. And it seems very contradictory, but I think
I would actually argue.
Let me just finish the sentence, and I'll let you pipe in.
Sorry.
And again, I want to reiterate, I think it's kind of a part of the genius of Nietzsche, because if he starts out with the starting premise that I want each individual to aspire to a higher ideal, but I also want them to create their own morals, then I'm going to create a kind of construct, this kind of far off figure that is vague enough that they'll project their own morals onto it and say that is what is best. But at the same time, it's also not some just degenerate, you know, nihilistic throwing off of all kinds of morals and, you know, succumbing to nihilism at the same time. I think that was kind of smart, but it's again going against the core idea of objective morality, which I find to be, you know, reasonable. I recognize its existence. I think Kant effectively proved that. But go on, what were you saying?
I was going to specifically say that to understand the purpose of the objective and the subjective morality is key here. To understanding what Nietzsche was getting on about when just, you know, kind of saying that you can create your own purpose in a sense, which is not, it's not really what he was going after as far as how it was taken, right? So the purpose of, like, there's a purpose to life, right? And that cannot be overlooked. And a purpose to life and meaning of life, right? And those are both very much based in objectivity and subjectivity. Like, so the purpose to life is objective, and this is based off of nature. And Nietzsche wrote about this when he was comparing evolving Schopenhauer's concepts of natural law and order as well. So the concepts of objective natural morality, right, is that there is no such thing as actual morality. The only thing that is, in a sense, moral, right? And we're using moral here because it's the best word to use. Not that morality is the subject matter. It's just that nature is the all-encompassing baseline, right? This is what led eventually to the concept that God is dead, and that spirituality does not necessarily equate to God. And so spirituality is more or less it's the feeling of one's purpose, right? Like the overarching concept of being one with nature, and not being one with nature like some kind of crazy hermit or whatever, and going out and living like some kind of bearded guy living with squirrels,
like Tom is.
Yeah, like your guy on a spirit quest. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but no, he very much was talking about this concept that it has a purpose. Like nature fulfills nature presents a purpose. And that purpose is legitimately, when you break it down, is cell division, right? It's reproduction. That's your whole purpose. Your whole purpose is driven to that. It's the whole concept of animalistic nature, and looking at man as an animal, which Schopenhauer did a lot. And the thing is, like, when reading Nietzsche, you have to pretty much read every other German philosopher that came before him, because he builds off a lot of his concepts. He has built off of their works, in totality. Like, you can see the specific you can look at it and you can almost read somebody else's work through his writing, and you can do that with every German philosopher and their predecessors. So the concept that nature is well, that's kind of God in a sense, right? Like God is nature, or never rephrase that. Nature is God. And that it provides you but one purpose, and that is the purpose of procreation. There is nothing else. There is no other meaning to life. Every other bit of meaning that is put on life is subjective. It is the concepts that we have put on it. Like Nietzsche wrote about that significantly, that the morals don't exist and stuff like that, right? Where you kind of create your own, right? Like the Ubermensch kind of creates his own will to power and his own rights and all this other stuff. And to some extent, that's kind of correct. Like, there is no such thing as like rights of man, right? Other than what we have created for man. Kind of like how like the whole stupid thing about society and constructs and things of that nature. But at the same time, it's correct. Like, there are a lot of things that are social constructs, and rights are one of them. Morals are one of them. These things are not innate, right? Like, nature itself does not grant us moral bindings. It does not grant us meaning. Any type of meaning that we have is created by us, that is granted to us, by our society and our situations and our civilizations. These things are subjective, and these things can be given or taken or replaced by the individual themselves. And that was the concept of the Übermensch, right? The Übermensch was, by definition, he was the individual that could create his own destiny and forge his own will. These things are based off of the subjective, because once you realize that there is no meaning to life, it is what you make it mean. It's your call after that. You write the script after you understand and realize that there is no such thing as a meaning to life. There is but a purpose to life. Life has but a purpose. Life has no meaning. And once you look at it from that point of view, Nietzsche's work kind of comes to fruition. Or not fruition. It kind of comes into light as to how he means these things. Like, he specifically is like the Übermensch is specifically an individual that has actualized the objectivity of truth and objectivity of nature, and is applying the subjectivity of mankind's concepts onto what it is that he wants to create. Now, with that being said, that's where his moral standing comes in, where a lot of people would like to think, and that's why I don't think that Logan and the other guy that you mentioned are Ubermensch. Like they have, you know, actualized a means of power, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they have accomplished a power that is in line with natural order, natural law, and objective truth. They have actualized a subjective truth and a subjective power, which means that they have not actually gone in line with what is truthful. So, and where Kant is absolutely correct, and I agree with you on that, and how it's easily, you know, laid out and it's very cut and dry. In order to have your foundations to Nietzschean theory and to these grander, more philosophical concepts, than, like, I honestly, yes, Kant is a philosopher, but he's also much more of a mathematician in a sense. He has a lot of very cut and dry equations to the way he writes, and that's great because he set a groundwork, he set a foundation, and you have to have that basis to build off of if you are going to go into a more esoteric concept like you do have with Schopenhauer and Nietzsche, who base all of their works off of Kantian stuff. And before that, obviously, it's like a building block system. And they grow it and they meld it and they make people understand what it is to be objective and subjective, specifically with a priori and priori thought. That's a very specific thing that I think we should touch on. The concept that a priori is not it's not a truth that you know to be true, right? A priori is a thought sans feeling. It is innate. It is innate concepts. It is that which is, it's kind of like natural instinct. Like an instinct is more a priori than anything else can be described as a priori. It is the natural laws at work on mankind, which is a priori. And this also evolved into racial consciousness and racial concepts or whatever later on in the 1800s, where you have these mentalities of, okay, so how do civilizations come about? What is the defining factor of the psychology of different races to create civilizations differently from one another? And that those are a priori concepts, these innate concepts that are ingrained within the racial psychology of all these different groups. And then obviously priori thought is you know, thought post
You're thinking of posteriori, I believe.
What I say?
You just said priori, a priori, and priori.
Yeah, I'm sorry. A posteriori and posteriori. God, I'm sorry.
No, it's a priori and
a posteriori.
Yep. And
yeah,
a posteriori.
What? No, you're absolutely right, and I'm absolutely out of my mind right now, and I'm sorry because I'm sitting next to his books, and I just should remember these things.
It's fine. I don't fault anyone for forgetting names or doing anything like that. I mean, I'm an American and I'm speaking German terms here, and most of my library of books that I need to read, I still haven't read. I've downloaded over like 2,000 different PDFs, and out of them, I think I've read maybe like 15.
Oh, well, yes. But no, yeah. So yeah, my apologies. So yeah, the a priori thought and the posteriori, or I can't even remember how to even pronounce it. I'm so sorry. I don't know. That was nuts. I just went down like a rabbit hole of thought processes there, of trying to I guess kind of elaborate on how the evolution of that worked out. But you had your thought sans interaction, and you had your thought post interaction, and that's your posteriori, and then which is post the post interaction concept of it, and that is the building blocks for objectivity and subjectivity, which Kant didn't really get into.
I gotta disagree with that. I think your concept of a priori is fundamentally wrong, because it's kind of an inherent truth, and one of the things that he does go into is causality being an internal thing, being an a priori thing, that we don't need to really learn it. It's kind of an innate thing between us. So if we see, you know, if there's like a billboard and a ball falls from behind the billboard, we have innate a priori that eventually the ball is going to come out from the other side of the billboard, as he would put it. But, or I think his specific example was that there is, you know, a house being built, and if the whole lower section of the house were to disappear, then the rest of the house wouldn't remain where it is, that it would move. It was a kind of internalized causality that was an a priori for physics and such like that. So I gotta disagree, and I think Kant would disagree too, that a priori it is a knowledge, it is a know, and it goes into the difference between whether you can actually know something, but for the purpose of simplicity, will equate 99% confident assumption with actually knowing. Here it is a knowing, when actually it's 99% confidence assumption that something is going to happen. Like one of the first things that Kant bases his entire morality off of is the one thing good unto itself without qualification is a good will, and he goes into length explaining this. But even so, if we just lay that down and we try to like pick holes in it, we can see that no, it seems to be a concept that holds. It seems to be a truth that, yeah, we did kind of know this. Of course, goodwill unto itself, a will to do good is good without qualification. You don't need to give it an extra qualifier, because in any kind of context, it is a good thing, and it's the context that makes them the actions different, not the goodwill.
And I agree, yet I disagree at the same time, because we get that if the foundation of the house is to be removed, that physics is going to take the house down.
Mm-hmm.
And within that, as it is an a priori concept, we know that physics work, right? We understand that nature has physics is nature, right? Mathematics is nature. It's a quantifying nature. So the thing about that is that innately we're going to know how nature works, because that's truth. It's objective truth. That is something we can't change, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of the thing about the objective aspect of the a priori thought, is that it is innate. It is innate knowledge of truth. But that's the thing is like truth is nature. Nothing else. Like only nature is objectively true. All things in nature are true. Now, everything after that is subjective. Anything that we place upon it afterwards is subjective. Like we can know, like and the thing about good. That's why I would disagree with the concept that we know what is good, because we can know what is good for like in the constructs of nature and how nature would make things work. As far as the moral constructs of society, we're talking about, if we're to be morally good, I suppose, towards an individual. And obviously Kant was talking about this from a Christian standpoint, right? A religious standpoint. So his viewpoint of what is good is going to be based off of what is good in the concept, or within the confines of God. And by the time that Nietzsche got a hold of that, God had died in a sense, right? Like the spirituality of Christianity had left the mass majority of Europeans, specifically in Germany, because of the schism and the secularization of the mass of the German people. So you have this basis that, yes, innate truth is what a priori is, but it's innate truth within the constructs of what is objectively true through nature, not as what is subjectively true through man's concepts of things. And that's the difference. That's the big breaking point between Kant and Nietzsche by that time, is that you have Kant thinking within religious constructs, and you have Nietzsche thinking in secular constructs. So the objective truth to a person of secular belief is going to be that of nature, is the all-seeing objective the objective truth. And then with a religious individual, the objective truth is going to be that of God, and not separating nature from God at all.
I'm gonna have to disagree with you there. Yes, of course, I do think he has a bias, but if you read Grounding for the Metaphysics of Morals, he very much by his premise conclusion format, he very much, God does have an element, and especially a strong element in some chapters, but him actually formulating the categorical imperative, I find that his premise conclusion, it leaves very little room for bias. It leaves very little room for a context based justification for it. That if you agree with the premises, and I think he does a good job explaining the premises, because the premises come from the premises of previous conclusions,
Yep.
beginning with an a priori premise. I think he does justify that without requiring some kind of an extraordinary belief or an extraordinary kind of jump in logic that, okay, this is true, but just follow me here for a moment. I'm going to jump just a little bit past your realm of disbelief. I don't think he does that within it, but we're going to have to disagree and postpone that to the second part of the show, because we still have yet to do your book review, and I believe your book review was the book that was it was inspired Blade Runner. And am I correct?
Yes, that is correct.
All right, so why don't you do your book review, and we'll put a pin in this conversation, pick it up right after that.
We'll jump back to the philosophy of it.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So the book that I had read was "Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep?" And that is a completely different field of discussion than what we were just on. Where this was more of, all right. So it was. It takes place in the year 2021. Obviously,
and this is going to be one of the few times I do interject in this. I have a question about the replicants. Are they actual like androids with programming, or are they kind of like fleshy, like biological, almost like clones that have replaceable products? Because the movie made it seem like they were more like clones, but they use genetic engineering to manufacture them how they want. So are the this could just be me being ignorant of lore, but are they actual like androids, like programmed robots, or are they like genetic clones with biological bodies?
They are. It almost doesn't it almost doesn't specify, actually, which is really odd about the whole book. I never even thought to delve into that, because it was more like the replicants just were, right? Like they're not robots, but they're not human either. I mean, they're closer to human than they are to robots. They don't have mechanical parts or anything. It's like it's almost like the DNA is the only part of it. Like the DNA is code, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they're just like, they have, some of them have like robotic aspects to them. I guess all of them really do. Like they have like, their eyes are slightly different and all these other things. You can see like the reflection of the eyes and things like that whenever you shine lights at them.
Mm-hmm.
But the reasons for those being is that they were, it doesn't really, actually, honestly, the book is actually really short. And it doesn't really get into too much detail about like the androids themselves, like their construction.
Mm-hmm.
Which
well, that was my one question. I'll let you continue with your book review. That was always just something that I never get a good answer from by watching the movie.
Yeah, I just honestly, when I was reading the book, and obviously watching the movies, I just kind of assumed that the androids were like just genetically engineered human beings, right? Because like, all right, so in the book, the whole planet of Earth was pretty much just like devastated by global wars and stuff, killing just like absolutely millions of people and whatever, and like it drove humankind off world, and we had colonies on Mars and stuff, and they a lot of life was destroyed, so they started to build the majority of the life that was destroyed were animals, right? So we lost pretty much like all the species of animals on Earth at the time. And so these companies started building robotic animals, including humans. And so what had happened is that the like people started collecting animals, which is like a big deal. Like if you owned animals, you were, something special. It was like a status symbol to own animals. Depending on, it didn't matter what it was. It was just like a fake animal was something to have. Like it was a very important thing that it was a status symbol, right? That you could have like a horse or a bird or sheeps and things like that nature, or sheep in that nature. And And
Imagine if you just decided to imagine if they're hipsters still living at that time, people get like cats or dogs, and in the movie the girl had a fake snake. Imagine someone just like getting an echidna. What the hell is this
yeah,
thing?
no, yeah, you would have like all these weird things, um, and they started handing these things out as well, specifically androids. They would hand out androids to the Mars immigrants and stuff, and then they were almost indistinguishable from true men and women, right? That's kind of where it drew
Mhm.
the line of like what the android was, because it said it was almost indistinguishable from humans, which would mean that their genetic parts were or their biological parts were biological, right, not mechanical.
Mhm.
They would just function like human beings, and the same with the animals as well. Um, and so what had happened is that the governments of Earth had become super fearful that the androids were going to be able to, I guess, infiltrate or do whatever it is that they want to do, because they were, in a sense, due to the fact that they were androids, are technically superior to human beings. Um, and because of this type of thing, the governments feared them. They banned them on Earth. They were still allowed to be out in the colonies, and they used them for war and stuff like that. Pretty much what it is they genetically engineered slaves, and they feared this type of mentality here on Earth, and they outlawed them. And so they banned all these replicants on Earth from being allowed to just exist in general. Obviously, you can still have replicant animals, but you couldn't have replicant humans on planet Earth. The replicants were still allowed to be off world, so you could still use them for pretty much war or whatever, which a lot of companies did. Is they would like buy armies of androids, and they would fight them for conquest out on the colonies and things of that nature. Um, yeah, so they kind of banned them, and then they have the main character, which is Rick Deckard, right? He's a They don't really call them Blade Runners in the book, because obviously it's not what they're called, but he's like a bounty hunter. And his job is specifically to be commissioned to find these rogue androids and quote unquote retire them, right? Um, but they fight back. Obviously, if they get cornered, like they're not going to go down without a fight. So the book is pretty much just going through. And then another funny thing about the book that is completely different than the movie. Obviously, there's a lot of differences between the book and the movie. But one of the major ones I thought that was odd they had removed from the movie was that Rick Deckard is married. It starts off with him being married in the book, and they don't have a wife figure at all in the movies, right? I guess they did that to remove it so they could have like the Rachel and him love affair kind of thing. So they could kind of artificially create like a love interest for the film, which is fine because it makes it a really good noir film. But the book, I like the dark aspects that it goes into, the psychology of it, where in the book there's like these things called like they're like mood alters, like they're like a mood altering type of device where you can set your mood, right?
Mhm.
Like you go over to this device or whatever and you type in a code, and it artificially sets your mood for you. So you're like, if you want to be happy or you want to be attracted to your wife or something, right? Like you can go and punch a code in for that. And they have like regular scheduled programs because they can have like their entire schedule, and the whole daily schedule is based off of the different programs that you would plug into these mood altering devices. So it's a very controlled environment. Like the whole thing is very dystopian, very surreal, which I'm a big fan of. I enjoy dystopian type of novels such as like 1984, but specifically in Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? It focuses a lot on what is humans, like, or what it means to be human. What does it mean to be alive? Which I guess kind of goes into what we were talking about before, of what it is to have a purpose, what it is to have meaning.
Mhm.
Um, and that was kind of like the big drawback of the book, was specifically just delving into that concept. Like once you get past all the the fun sci-fi aspects of it, and the dystopian future of everything being destroyed, and people living in like a destroyed world that's controlled by super authoritarian governments. um it it really breaks down into what it means to be human, what does it actually mean to be a human being, if these replicants are so like us, right? Like if these beings out are identical in every way, with the exception of the fact that they're genetically engineered, they're created, right? Like we created them, and then there's still that mentality of, well, who created us? Are we human, or are, like are we extraterrestrials? Are we aliens? What are we? Is never obviously answered in the book, but it draws that into question. Is that human? Like, is that what it means to be human? Is that we are biological? And with that being said, it kind of goes into a more modern concept of, does AI like does that mean that it's human? The fact that it can think, does something, just thought process, like the whole I think therefore I am, right? How does that play into it? Because the androids think, right, throughout the book. Like these things don't just have programmed thought processes. They're not completely programmed. Like they're completely self-aware. They're their own things. They're alive. They think, they completely think for themselves. They're not like androids in movies like iRobot or something, where it's got like, like whatever it is, like the however many rules it was, and like they can't hurt humans and all other fun stuff. No, like they were completely designed to be as lifelike as possible, right? Like to be humans is what they were pretty much designed to be. And that's why they were removed from societies, because they were too real, right? Like they were too much like us. They were completely, almost indistinguishable from other human beings, which kind of calls into question, again, if we're going to talk about subjectivity as far as society is concerned, the morality of what it means to deny something the right to life. And that hits kind of heavy on the whole thing. Like, if these androids were alive, like if they had the right to life, if they had like, and that's the thing, do they have the right to life? Like, we created them, do they have the right to life, kind of thing. And there's many different directions we can take that concept, because personally I do believe that they don't have the right to life. Like I believe that they don't have the right to life, right? So I don't believe that anything that's genetically engineered has the right to life. I honestly don't believe that human beings have the right to life, to be honest with you. I don't believe in a right to life. Nature doesn't have a right to life. You're not guaranteed, life at birth. That's not how it works. So I personally, from a very objective perspective, do not believe that the androids had the right to life, and that we could have, like that Decker's job was kind of, as well, while not justifiable, but it's understandable. The point of, like, he went to decommission these things that we created. It's not that, we were going off and exterminating another group of beings, like that we create, that organically sprouted up. We created the androids. We created the replicants, right? So therefore we should hold the life of the replicant in our hands, whether we want to do something with it or not, as far as kill it or let it live. So that decision entirely, I know that the book tries to make it out to seem that that, like, obviously we're supposed to call into question, like, oh, the right to life, is it justifiable that we can remove this thing's right after giving it consciousness, and if it thinks, therefore it is, and therefore it has the right to life. But obviously that's taking into account the right to life, right? Like, the book obviously harps heavily on the right to life, without question. There's almost no question at all that the book's specific focal point is the right to life. And that's from a very personal perspective, I do not believe in the right to life at all. So when I look at the book, I don't really see, I don't know. I don't have any moral hangups with, oh my God, Decker's, killing androids and this, that, or the other. Like, I'm not worried about the characters dying or this, that, either, because it's not really, it's not personally a thing. But I can understand from another perspective, where just, the general populace would look at it and really have to analyze whether or not that's something that we should do. Like, if we're going to create something that is going to be itself, like if it's going to be able to self-actualize and have introspective thought processes, is it moral? and justifiable to remove that. Like, do we have the right to give something life and then take it away? And
There's kind of a small contradiction I'm seeing in your thing. You slightly amended it, but I don't think that you completely amended it. At first you gave your justification that the replicants don't have a right to life because we created them. I would add something more onto that, but I'm just going with your argument that because we created them, it doesn't have a right to life, and therefore Deckard is justified in killing them. However, you slightly amended it a bit later by saying you don't believe in the right to life at all, and and stemming from that, I would say, wouldn't you think that there was a moral difference between Deckard going and killing one of the replicants and one of the replicants going and killing another person in order to say, like, maybe even if it's just in the case of self-defense, if one of the replicants defending itself, from being killed by Deckard and killed Deckard in response, don't you think that there would be a moral difference between the two actions of Deckard going to kill it and it killing Deckard in a means to preserve its own life?
In a means to preserve its own life, I don't. If it was going out to just maliciously kill, then yes, I see slightly a moral difference there. Again, morals are subjective, so this is based on our own perspectives on these things. Again, because I agree with Nietzsche. But I think that because it was a created being, that it doesn't have the same, it doesn't have the same, I guess, rights to do as it pleases as those of us that are organically created. See, this is where kind of like the dilemmas come into play, where the moral dilemmas come into play. Personally, I don't believe in a right to life. You're correct. But the thing is that nature has organically given us life and created us. And that's another thing, is like the replicants aren't supposed to be able to reproduce. So therefore it can't create life on its own. Humans can create life by reproduction and cell division. Replicants cannot.
I would like to just put a quick pin in this idea, and I would then like to ask, and it doesn't have to be a categorical yes or no thing. It can be another one of these cases of a spectrum, but by this line of reasoning, wouldn't a child born of in vitro fertilization have less of this supposed right to life than a naturally born child?
All right, so I think so. Yeah, I agree. Like, I think that if a human being, say like a test tube baby or something along those lines, like a lab grown infant, sure, it's a human being, right? Like, it's completely a genetic human being. It can reproduce later on in life, this, that, or the other, which would again put its life above that of the replicant. But in our real modern life, let's say, like, all right, so I guess it gets into the concept of cloning. Does a clone have the same rights as a biological human, right? Like a real biological human, not something that was, created. No, I do not believe it does. I do not think that. I think that if we are to create something, like, we are allowed to do with it as we please. Like, if we are to create clones, then we should be able to do with those clones as we please. We should be able to organ harvest them, use them as slaves, whatever we need to do with them, that we want to do with them, because we created them. Their entire existence lies in our good graces of creating them. We created them. And for all
that's also true with children.
It is, but it's not at the same time, because those children were born out of natural, a natural circumstance, right? Like, we created a child out of natural. Like, say you have a child that was born of natural circumstance. It has rights. Well, I guess it doesn't really technically have rights. Nothing has rights, but in our civilization specifically,
it has a moral difference in terms of.
Yes, it does. It has. There's a moral difference between a natural birth and an engineered birth. An engineered birth, regardless if it creates an organic human or not, is still engineered. And that person, or let's even say the clone is a person, right? Let's not even use the word clone. Let's say person. If a person is engineered, that person that is engineered it is owned by the engineer. The engineer is the creator of that thing. The engineer is the person that holds all the keys to engineered creature's life. Like it whatever it needs to be, whatever it was created for, it's supposed to do, because that's what the creator created it for. A child is created by its parents to, well, let me rephrase this. A child should be created by its parents in order to be better than those parents and to perpetuate the life of the lineage of those parents, right? Like, it is supposed to be cell division. It's supposed to carry on the natural order, the purpose of life. The purpose of life is to create children so that they can create more children. The purpose of the engineered being is whatever the engineer deems that purpose to be. It's not, okay, so if you have two parents, two parents don't come together with the purpose of engineering children for slavery. I mean, that's just that's this is going to be a rabbit hole discussion. This is going to be great. I don't, it's not the same thing of a natural born thing. You don't take a sperm and an egg from two parents and naturally go about it. You know, like, you have the whole thing, right? Like, if you partake in intercourse and a child is born of this, it's a human being, baseline human being. It has all the capabilities and all the purpose of life that any other human being would have in a natural setting. But yeah, as soon as you get into the engineering part of it, as soon as you get into the deliberate engineering of a being, it loses any other meaning and, honestly, any other purpose. Obviously, if it's an organic creature, then it still contains an innate, as we were saying before, a priori purpose, which is to breed, right? That's the a priori purpose of all human beings, of all animals, really. That's the thing in and of itself, as Schopenhauer would say.
I have another question, and this isn't meant to be like refutations or anything. I'm just kind of putting my own, like, beliefs aside to try to get to the bottom of this thing. I need to ask, is it actually the difference of the birth, or is it the difference of conception? For example, we have the natural birth, the conception. So, well, the question I was going to posit was, we already have, the regular birth, sex leads to impregnation, leads to birth.
Yeah.
But I would say, would it kind of be a middle ground between, say, a test tube baby where, a sperm and egg are grown in an artificial womb and born that way? I think it would be in the middle then, if it was the case that, say the mother was infertile. So to help with that, modern medicine came and they did, they took some of her DNA, made an RNA sequence from that, and then used some kind of stem cell process to artificially use her RNA to make an egg, and then placed it in her womb, and then the sex happened normally. I would ask, would that baby have less right to life than the naturally conceived one? It's still
I would say no,
born, but it's just, genetically kind of created through this mechanistic means.
I would say no, because the purpose, or the whole point of all of that was to bypass infertility, and not for any other purpose, right? It was to bypass infertility to ensure that the natural order of things could come to fruition, right? Like, they wanted to they wanted to do what everybody else was doing. They wanted to do what we were saying earlier, like the conception aspect. They wanted to do that, but they couldn't. So we used technology to bypass the infertility aspect.
So you're saying it's exactly on par with the naturally conceived baby then?
It is, just with the aid of modern science. It's not born of science, right? Like, it wasn't engineered. Like, we didn't develop this being. Like, so say you take a baby, like you have an embryo, like a test tube baby, right? And I mean, even if that's what you're breeding them for, like if you're breeding babies in test tubes, that you have at random like a sperm cell and an egg cell, and you breed a baby in a test tube without parents. That's another thing. It's like, you do it without parents. You just have a baby. It just is created in a lab. That baby has less of a right than any natural baby, because it's specifically being born in a lab. And honestly, it's going to be born in a lab for a purpose. There's going to be a reason it was born in the lab. Like, why are you growing this child? Is it just to see if you can do it? Because if you're doing it for the purpose strictly to create a human being, right? Like, if the purpose of the birth is to do just that, to just create a human being that is to have a normal life. Like, this baby is just to be a baby. Like, okay, here we go. There's a human being. That's it. We created a human being. Okay, cool. But what is the purpose of creating these human beings? If the purpose of creating the human being is just to create another human being that is to live a natural life, I think that child has slightly less of a societal right than any other natural born human being, because it was engineered, but at the same time it was engineered to fulfill its purpose. It wasn't engineered to fulfill a meaning that is subjective that we put on it, right? So if you grow babies in a test tube and then its purpose is to be I don't know, which was experiment on it, right? Like, so we need 5 experiments. We need human beings for this.
I think I could put a decent enough reason behind it. Let's give Crout T his vindication. Say we're trying to prove the difference of intelligence, nature versus nurture through knockout studies. So basically, a couple comes in, they each one, give them a nominal fee for participating. And basically we take a little bit of DNA from their unborn fetus and we grow that as a test tube baby, but we just do a knockout study on particular genes. And since they're identical, we can control the difference in environment and thus see the difference between each of these genes. I think that could be a reason, putting aside the ethics, I think that could be a reasonable scientific reason for growing these test tube babies for the purpose of having them live a normal life as possible and measuring the difference between the original child and these test tube babies.
Now, would the test tube baby be, like, what would you do with the test tube baby? Would you raise it? Would you give it to the same parents, or where would you raise it? Because if you're creating,
you would try to raise it with as much of a normal life as possible to see.
But the point is you're still using it as an experiment, correct? Like, the point of the child is not.
Well, the experiment is to see how close that child will live to the original one.
Oh, yeah. Well, at that point, honestly, you're removing the rights of both children because they're both experiments at that point. One's just a different type of petri dish than the other. Like, you're placing a meaning on the infant before it's born. Like, it has a meaning. Its meaning is to provide data, right? Its purpose is obviously to propagate. It's a natural human being. It's well, I wouldn't say natural, but it's an organic human being. It's going to have an a priori purpose, which is to procreate, because it's not devoid of that will to do so. So it, while it has rights, the second one, the one that was born in the test tube, I think significantly has less rights societally than the one that was born of the parents. Like, this one, okay, so you take cells from the unborn fetus. You create it in a test tube. That one has significantly less rights to anything than the one that was born of the parents. I mean, you have both of them that are growing up, supposedly to provide data, one of natural born and one of test tube, and to see which one comes out to be more or less along the lines of normal or whatever data you're trying to collect from them, how close they are, how similar they are, what it is they accomplish in life. The point is that one was specifically designed for that. Like it was specifically designed to be a compare and contrast with a natural born infant. That's the thing. Like, you created an infant to be a compare and contrast with a replica of it. Like, or a baby was born and a replica of that baby was also born, but the replica's entire purpose was to be a compare and contrast statement to the non-replica. It doesn't have any other meaning to it than that. Like, you are literally ascribing its entire life to, while we are saying it is raised normally, sure, and it is raised by normal parents, it is raised in a completely normal environment. The only reason why it's being raised in a completely normal environment is because we want to collect data from that infant, and that's its meaning. That's its meaning in life. Its meaning in life is to provide us data. So it significantly has less of a right to life, or rights in general, than the non-replica. Because the non-replica is specifically just there to live its normal life, and then the replica's job is to live a parallel life to collect data.
But
obviously, we're throwing ethics out the window here.
Of course, I'm not Nietzschean, so I have a completely different approach to this. But I would say you began it by saying their purpose for life is, to gather data on this, but yet at the same
Well, no,
time.
no, their purpose is is cell division. Their meaning is
All right. All
is
right, their
data.
meaning. They both have
Yeah.
the exact same meaning, yet at the same time, each one seems to have a different value into it, even though without each one, that data the other provides is worthless. So it seems that they have a linked and shared value in this case.
There is the link to it is that they are to be compared with each other.
Mm-hmm. And if one of them dies, then all data for past that point is it's nothing to be compared to. It becomes irrelevant and it would lose its point to life, right?
It's meaning, yes, for sure. I mean, if it's, well, that's the thing though. You said the first baby, like the organic baby, we'll call one the organic and one the replica, right?
Mm-hmm.
The organic babies, like the organic baby doesn't have a meaning for the scientists, right? Like it lives its life, and yes, data is collected of it, right, to compare with the other one. But the only reason why the data from the organic baby is being collected is to compare that organic data to the replica data. That's the only reason why you're collecting data from the organic baby. The organic baby still has whatever meaning it would like to it wills to power whenever it comes to the age that it can understand the concepts of self-actualization, right?
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have subjective meanings put on it through the scientists. It is able to live a natural life because that's the purpose of it. It's supposed to live a completely natural life so that it can be at the control of the experiment. So what, and the parents were gonna have the child anyway, right? I'm assuming that was the point. It's like you're gonna have two parents that are gonna have a baby, and they're like, hey, you're gonna have a baby. Let me get some of that DNA and then create a replica of that baby. And then while you're raising that baby, let me collect data on it, and we will compare and contrast it with our replica baby and see how it adds up. So the entire point of the replica is to be an experiment, where the point of the organic child is to be an organic child. Like its whole purpose of life is to cell divide. Its meaning is to be a normal human being, or whatever meaning it wishes to put on its own life, and however it lives throughout that. It is for all intents and purposes organic and natural. The replica is entirely the antithesis of that. It was completely designed to be a compare and contrast experiment for the organic child. It has completely different sets of moral values ascribed to it.
Mm-hmm. I think I better understand this now. I completely disagree. I come from it from almost the opposite standpoint. I will admit that there is a part of value in such things of I subscribe to duty-based ethics. I don't think consent-based ethics have much value outside of contractual obligations. But so for duty-based ethics, I can completely understand what is the purpose of a hammer. I made this hammer, and using a hammer as it should be, it fulfills its duty of its creation. That is an ethical good. But at the same time, I subscribe to the Kantian notion that there is a categorical imperative, that we have the ability to kind of link up to the metaphysical, that the metaphysical objectively exists, whether or not there's a physical triangle, whether or not that triangle is created. The right triangle will still have these it'll have these truths to it. It'll still have the Pythagoras theorem apply to it or not. And these relationships between these variables of a triangle, whether or not they physically exist, they do objectively exist in metaphysical. And by being able to kind of metaphysically construct and synthesize things, that we do have certain duties, and Kant would say we have a categorical imperative by the nature of having these tools, by being endowed with these tools. And I think he applies this, and that it comes from God, of course, because he's Christian. I'm Christian too, but I think it's irrelevant whether it comes from God or naturally arose.
I was going to ask that. I was going to say, like, are you religious or not?
Yeah, I am, but at the same time, I don't think it matters whether it rose naturally or it rose by creation of God. There's a whole nother argument about whether any truth can actually exist without God, but that's a whole nother argument that I believe I believe if Uber was here, the book I recommended to him to read, and he did read, was Confessions by Saint Augustine. And I think Saint
Oh yeah.
Augustine, I think he touches on that. Either him or I'm mixing up with Thomas Aquinas. But
Aquinas is also really good to read as well.
I honestly, I think we should bring. This is a kind of a complaint that I had, and it's I don't like. I think that the sermons are the worst part of churches. I find them to be. It sounds funny, but I find them to be the most kind of shallow, the most hollow. They often give these very kind of typical speeches. It usually falls into two categories. One is the verse speech. They'll usually pick out like maybe a single verse or like a paragraph within a chapter. They'll like read it out, and then they'll give their own thoughts and like commentary on it, and maybe try to apply it to modern life. And the second one, it's often just kind of like basic bitch, just kind of like moralizing, like talking like maybe the sermon's about why murder is wrong and why it's so important to be a part of the Ten Commandments, the base structure of the law. And I would love it. I think Christianity would definitely, it would serve so much better if the preacher said, like one day, instead of saying all this, said, today I'd like to talk about St. Thomas Aquinas and his concept of and again, I'm probably mixing them up, the concept of the first mover and how through causality we can get evidence of God, and talk about the philosophical basis of that. I mean, there's so much like theology that is meshed in with philosophy about how things necessarily have to be in order for our basic beliefs and morality to be true, but yet they don't really touch on that. I mean, going from a completely kind of Kierkegaardian and Kantian perspective, the hymns and everything like that, I think they have a much more, they're more religious, as Kierkegaard would put it. It has a more dedication to faith, a more real chance of actually fulfilling what the whole purpose is of connecting to Christ for the Christian specific sect. But that was getting off topic here. But like I was going down, I think that even if you create this child with a specific purpose, I don't actually think that there is that much of a moral difference if you have it born in in an in vitro fertilization, or the test tube baby or the natural birth. If I'm creating the same thought experiment here of the three different couples, one decides we want a good retirement, so we're going to have a child, and that child will become wealthy and help pay for us for retirement. And the in vitro fertilization family does the same thing. And a scientist couple say they're going to use an artificial test tube baby for the exact same reason. All three of us are all three of them are being created with the exact same purpose, yet I can't really see that there is a categorical difference between them in terms of moral law. Each of them have the ability to construct and deconstruct in this metaphysical plane and deal with throughout the categorical imperatives. They each have a will to enforce, if we're going to go through a very Nietzschean perspective.
All three have the same purpose, which is replication. Like that's their purpose. All three of the babies, regardless of how they're created or what their meaning is, their whatever their subject of meaning.
You know what I mean? I'm mixing them up. All three of them have the same meaning. They were all three created to give the parents a good retirement by getting rich and helping them.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing though. But like that's the case, is that yes, that's what the parents created the children for, in a sense, is that they could fulfill this thing, this cycle, right, where they help them retire. But the thing is that as far as base objective truth to all three of the babies, they're all the same, because they all embody the same natural order, the same natural law. They all embody the same purpose. All three of the babies, regardless, the parents have no control over the natural order of their organic infants, because when it comes right down to it, those infants have the ability to procreate, right? They have, and naturally so. They weren't designed to procreate by engineers. They were naturally they are naturally able to do so because they are organic human beings. They are human beings, right? They are actual animals.
Mm-hmm.
They have given birth to 3 animals. There are 3 animals here we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And regardless of what, because like, yes, the parents are the creators of these children, and they are, you know, they have a whatever their thought process is of what they want to use for the child. The problem is though, is when you go into this, and you say, okay, so at that point in time, you cannot. I guess you could argue specifically, and this is where it comes down to what we should and should not do in a sense. But there really is no moral hangups really with, and this is all from subjective concepts, right? That there is no moral hangups with breeding slaves. Like if you were to organically breed slaves, there's really nothing stating that this is objectively wrong, as long as you're not. Is the only thing that would be objectively wrong about all of this is if they were preventing the 3 children from fulfilling their natural purpose, which is to procreate. Like if they
could do that before even the inception of it, so they could genetically engineer the child to be infertile.
If that's the case, then if they do that, then the child has no purpose, and then the child is completely subjective on its meaning, and therefore its meaning becomes its purpose. You see what I'm saying? Like if it loses all natural purpose, the meaning of the creation, the meaning of the inception becomes the purpose. Therefore, it is in fact a slave at that point. If like the replicants, right? Like we'll go back to the book with the replicants.
Mm-hmm.
The replicants were created to fulfill certain roles in life. Like they can't reproduce. They're not given the ability to naturally reproduce. So whatever their meaning is, like whatever their meaning for creation was, becomes their purpose for life. It replaces the natural purpose. It replaces the natural order. It is a given meaning and not a natural purpose. Therefore, it is not on the same par as an organic human with a purpose. Let me rephrase that. It's not on par with a creature with a purpose. The creature with the natural purpose, the creature with an a priori innate purpose, has more of a right than a creature that has but a subjective meaning based on a posteriori inception.
Mm-hmm.
Or sorry, not inception. A posteriori conception. Sorry.
Mm-hmm. And getting more into this thing with the replicants, and thinking about it, even from a Kantian objective perspective, the idea of breeding a slave. So before it's even before it's created, in the sense, it's not like you're taking a person, making them a slave. It's not like you're inhibiting the growth of something that's already existing to make it a slave. It's that you're creating something already, something genetically innately done. And I'm going to assume it's kind of like the case of the Blade Runner movie, where once it's created, they can't technologically reverse the creations. They have a set lifespan and such like that. I can't really think of a
Well, they didn't have. Like, you know how, like in the movie they had Roy Batty and he had like a 6-year lifespan. That's not how it was in the book. The book did not give like a 6-year lifespan to the.
Did they have just like a natural human lifespan, or could they?
Yeah, like they created them to be like as human as absolutely possible. They weren't like they weren't engineered to be like that. You know, like they weren't engineered with like a 5-year lifespan or something, or where they have because they grew up. In a sense, you know, well, they didn't really grow up. They were created like an adult, but they didn't have like a 5-year lifespan. They had a regular adult lifespan at that point. So they would live like normal people would and grow old.
But getting back into that, I can't even think from an objective standpoint from this idea of creating an organic slave. It's because I'm trying to think of every single way I can come at this, because a potential human, I can completely and totally agree with this. And I can't think of even like Kant or any kind of objective moralist actually posing a decent criticism of this, that there is no right to life for something that doesn't even exist yet. There is no, I mean, yes, you're getting into the purpose of reproduction and things, but it's not that specific combination of egg and sperm of those specific ones to create that specific child. Whether you have a child today or tomorrow, it's ethically the same in terms of procreation. So I mean, if you ever seen or read Brave New World, I mean, that's
Yes.
what they basically did for the Epsilon people. They did stunt their growth with alcohol, but they were genetic replicants. They already created their DNA for this specific purpose for them to basically be slaves. It was Epsilon all the way up to Delta, I believe. And yeah, the alphas and betas were the only ones that had unique genetic sequences. So that's presented as, a moral wrong in the society. But thinking about it now through this kind of, and I always hate this word, but I guess it's coming into fruition now through this kind of dialectic, I can't really think of an ethical objection to this premise.
Because that's kind of where Nietzsche was going with it, is that it breaks down, and I guess this will take the pin out of the conversation we were having earlier, because this really ties into this heavily, where you don't have like there is the moral objective good, right? And anything that is according to natural law is good, and anything that is counter to natural law and order is wrong, right? Like morally wrong. And that was kind of the point of it earlier, was that's the whole aspect of subjective morality, or like, placing your own values on things, is because at the end of the day, values and meanings and things, they aren't real. They don't exist. They are something that we put on as something. It's very subjective. The objective aspect is only that which is morally good through nature, because the only thing that's morally good is that which coincides with natural order and law, and that which is morally wrong is that which is counter to natural order and law. And so you can have still an objective good and an objective wrong, still, even according to Kant, right? You still have an objective good and an objective wrong. You have your and I honestly, I don't, when I read
Grounding for the Metaphysics of Morals.
No, well, that too, but when I read Critique of Pure Reason, and it delves in, there's like it where he first wrote about a priori and a posteriori, the way I took it was not about moral truths or what was good or what was right, but was simply just an elaboration on the innate perceptions of mankind, like what was true, right? Like what was real, and by truth, not necessarily telling the truth or what was what was right by whatever concepts we would like to put on it, but what is real, what goes along with natural order, with natural law, what is objective without anything else. That was like a priori is what is objective sans concepts. Like this is an innate thought, or not even innate thought, but it's an innate concept sans any exterior influence. And then a posteriori is all those things that mankind has been that is subjective to man's thoughts, because it is something that we have perceived after sensation, right? Like, so a posteriori is pre-sensation, a posteriori is post-sensation, and that's kind of the thing. So like after, like post-sensation. So a test tube baby, a replicant, right? The replicant or the replicas we were talking about earlier is created out of an a posteriori subjective concept that we have placed upon the thing. The replicants are not created a priori, right? Like there was no point in time in evolution where a replicant was created. Humans were created a priori, right? Like, and I wouldn't, created is a strong word here. humans came into being a priori, right? We evolved a priori. We evolved into what it is to be a human being, into man, into Homo sapiens a priori. Before there was thought, there was man, right? Like we came into being afterwards. Like original sin was that first thought. That first thought that when mankind broke away from nature and we became sentient, that is the original sin, because we at that point stopped being completely adherent to nature's laws, and we became adherent to what it is that we perceived a posteriori in a subjective concept, and we were able to put subjective notions onto our surroundings, and we at that point broke ourselves from nature, from evolution, and we had to diverge on our own paths into what it is that we are today, and we had to relearn what, like, from an animal's perspective, like on a base level, right? You have like a spectrum, as we were talking. You spoke about it earlier about spectrum concepts, right? So an animal, from its base levels, is almost it's unintelligent, right? So to say like an animal, like a base animal with base sentience, able to perceive something a posteriori, so it gets a sensation and it reacts to that sensation, and was no different than really a beast, right? Like almost like a monkey. And we can look at chimpanzees and the great apes as a great example of this right now. They are, at this point in time in life, no longer a priori. They are a posteriori as far as a species is concerned. They are thinking like apes think. Like they create tools. They have social orders. They think. They have reached sentience. They understand, right? They even have base language. So the things that they are doing, if there's destruction, if there's cannibalism, which we have observed in chimpanzees, if there's cannibalism, if there are ritual acts, these things are all a posteriori. These things are subjective. These things are not within natural law and order. They are within the chimpanzee's social constructs, and those things are the foundations and the basis of what will eventually create civilization, will eventually create culture, and the concepts that arise out of those civilizations and culture will also be a posteriori, and they will eventually have to be retaught what it is to be a priori, what it is to understand nature sans the thought of man, or at that point for them it'll be nature sans the thought of ape. That's what we're at now, and that's what Nietzsche's eventual culmination of his concepts came to, and Schopenhauer was a great groundwork for this, of the concepts of nature, and the idea that when we say God is dead, or that you have to have the willpower, and you have to understand that it is a subjective concepts of morality that we place on these things, and realizing that the only real truth and order is an a priori concept of natural law and order. Objective truth is the only thing that is real, right? Like nature is the only thing that is real, and us as the subjective bearers of those things, we place our subjective concepts onto these things. So, to wrap up my rant, the replicants, right, they are created a posteriori. They have been created with a subjective meaning already placed upon them, and they did not naturally evolve a priori through nature's good graces or nature's order. Therefore, their meaning, because they are completely engineered a posteriori, their meaning is what is their meaning in life is a posteriori. They don't have an a priori innate objective purpose. They don't have purpose. The replicants don't have purpose. They are not designed to have purpose. They can't breed, so they have no purpose. So their entire existence is a posteriori. Therefore, there is no moral hangups about them being created as slaves.
And that's very interesting. And I completely understand your worldview, and I think it's coherent, everything like that. The only small hitch in that, and it could be a matter of subdivision, but limiting the amount of not the amount, limiting the natural purpose, and I'm using your word for purpose here, for just for reproduction, wouldn't just crap, I lost the words, but wouldn't just the drive to survive, that because it's a part of natural law that even if the organism doesn't reproduce, say there's species of jellyfish that don't reproduce, they just live on forever, wouldn't this if it's not a subcategory, wouldn't this be a second purpose for living, that no matter what kind of replicant thing you create, as long as it's a living thing, it would have this purpose to maintain itself, to survive, to crap, I'm losing the word. It's a biological term. It's, I think it's homeostasis or something like that, but basically just the innate tendency for a cell to remain alive in equilibrium.
Yeah, homeostasis is the equilibrium concept. But to simply remain alive, and that's honestly, that's a great question, because that was one of the things that kind of like hit me up about the book. Was because I agree, it is an odd thing, an odd concept, that a creature without purpose, right? A creature sans purpose, which is obviously reproduction, still has that drive to live. And you see this in the natural world, right? Like, why does an animal want to live? Well, it wants to live so it can fulfill its purpose, which is procreation, correct? So,
but what about, for example, like that specific species of jellyfish that I know, that they literally do not reproduce. All they do is, they live forever and just regenerate and replace the cells that die.
yeah, well, and that's the thing, is like their purpose is like, the one thing though, they're still doing the same thing. The replacing of those cells is still cell division. It's cell reproduction, right? So they're a vessel for the purpose of life. They're still fulfilling that purpose of cell division and cell reproduction, whether it's in the same fashion that we do it through mating or not. It's still there. And then obviously those jellyfish had to get here somehow. They didn't just manifest, right? Like they bred, right? They don't need to breed, but they do anyway, right? And the reason why they do is because, well, they do. That's their purpose, is to continue to sell. It's there's no real reason why and that's the thing. It's parasitic in nature, right? And obviously I wouldn't really say parasitic necessarily. I would say that it's just endless. Like, there's no point really for creatures to completely just reproduce and reproduce and reproduce. That's just the purpose of life. And there's no real end game for it. It just happens, right? Like, so if something becomes overpopulated, that's just whatever that happens, right? And then whatever happens in nature to fix and correct that problem will happen. There's like human beings, for instance, we are completely overpopulated on this planet. And what happened, that's just how it is. Like, if the jellyfish continue to repopulate, if they had no natural predators, they would just overpopulate the oceans, and they would just swim on top of each other and die from lack of food sources or oxygen or whatever else. And that's just how. But they would still breed. They would still keep doing it. And the same thing with Africans in Africa right now. There is no food supply. There is no reason to continue to breed or whatever. Like, they're all dying off, this, that, or the other. So they have like 9 kids still, and then their children are starving to death. And also that, it doesn't matter to animals that they continue to breed. It's just that is just their innate purpose of doing so. Like, it's an a priori concept that's just breed, cell divide, cell divide, cell divide. But when it came down to what you were saying earlier, like, does like the will to survive for the replicants, right? That was a big hang up that I had about it. And I completely, I like that you pointed that out, because that if people come to the same conclusion that I do, right? Or any people that hold the same worldview that I do, right? Would obviously more than likely come to the same conclusions that I did, but they also should analyze the book in that sense as well. That what does drive that? What does drive that will to life? Like, because in the book, the replicants do fight back, right? They can't reproduce, but they do fight Deckard. So, and then the reason is that because they get cornered and they don't want to die. There is that will to life, right? And then obviously, not to harp on Schopenhauer's the denial of the will to life and all that other things, which is kind of on the same concept of the what is it, your will to power, but it's more along the lines of they were fighting for no reason, right? Like, they had a subject, because they thought like human beings, because they were genetically engineered to be as close to humans as absolutely possible. They thought like we did. They thought in the same subjective manners that human beings did, right? So they still had that same biological thought processes, because they were designed to be just like human beings, except they weren't designed to breed. So we created them without a purpose, but we gave them all the same subjective concepts that a creature with a purpose would have. So it creates a dichotomy within the replicants themselves, and that is one of the most fascinating parts about the book. I found was the psychological dichotomy within the replicant itself, of how can a creature that is devoid of purpose still fight for that purpose, right? It's still fighting for that right to life. So, or it's still fighting for its life. And the only reason why something would fight for its life is to continue its purpose. But the thing is the replicants didn't have a purpose. They were just genetically engineered to function like a creature that has a purpose would. And in my opinion, that's extremely cruel to do to a creature. To give it a false hope, really. Because the replicants, regardless if they would fight and fight and fight, like sure they would live, but at the same time, they couldn't reproduce. So it almost makes it seem as that they would have to fight, that they would have to create meaning out of this individualism that they have been bestowed with. Because a creature without any purpose, honestly, is just living for itself at that point. Because it's not living for children. It's not living for cell division, right? The replicants couldn't cell divide. So they were living for themselves. They were living for an individualistic type of mentality. And in a sense, their purpose, while not having a purpose, right? Like they would have to create a subjective meaning for themselves, which is pretty much nihilism. Right? Like they were completely self-absorbed, self-indulgent, and they had to be because they didn't have a purpose, but they still had that innate desire. And that was the thing about the replicants, is that they didn't really they knew, but they didn't know at the same time, right? Like they didn't understand their purpose. Like they didn't understand that they didn't have a purpose. So they still fought on like they did have a purpose. Like and even then they realized that they couldn't breed. So this is like the most complicated part of this whole concept. That the creature would be able to fight its programming to survive, but also realizing that it also doesn't have a purpose, and that obviously I'm sure the replicants didn't have this ridiculous philosophical concept behind it, right? Where it's sitting here like you and I bantering back and forth for an hour and change.
But I think there's a few kind of basic fundamental premises that were missing in this particular example. I don't think that the replicants themselves, I don't think they held this worldview. So in this case, I don't think they would actually see their lack of ability to reproduce as a lack of purpose, and thus they wouldn't find a kind of hypocritical nature in their, preserving their own life.
Which is true. I agree wholeheartedly. No, you're right. I agree. They wouldn't have held this worldview at all. So to them, right, because like I'm going off of like a purely animalistic psychological perspective here, right? Obviously. And you're right. So for them, and let's go back and let's redefine terms again then. For the replicants, purpose wasn't what we were talking about purpose for the past hour on. Purpose to them was simply existence, right? Like their purpose was very much nihilistic in concept. Almost like a nihilist today would have its purpose, right? The purpose to a nihilist, in a sense, is because they don't further the concept into will to power. They stay in the concept of the self, this very self-absorbed, self-indulgent type of mentality. And the replicants didn't have a choice with their nihilism, right? Like they only had the nihilism, and that's their purpose. And to them, that was their world. It made sense to them that their purpose was simply to preserve their own life and exist, because that's all they had. That's all they got, right? Like that was their one thing they had, was simply existing. And so fighting for that, it almost became their cause, right? Like the banner that they held in combat was simply living. And then obviously Deckard is to step in there and remove that from them.
And we're getting about to the end of the show. It's been about an hour and a half, so I want to kind of wrap up this argument here, and I think we're going to have to fundamentally disagree, because arguing between duty-based ethics and Nietzschean ethics is something that, philosophers in academia are still going on and would take, years and years of debate to come to a conclusion. But I would say my refutation to all of this is looking through this duty-based lens, and also the fact that value can exist outside of this. Yes, there is value in reproduction and life leading to reproduction, but consider the consider this. Does art have value? Now, if we just say that the only source of value in this case, and I'm purposely shifting it away from meaning and purpose to a kind of comparison of value of what is a more valuable and less valuable thing.
Mm-hmm.
So reproduction, of course, yes, that is valuable. But after, say, a woman reaches menopause and she can't bear any more young, she's infertile. So is there a possibility for her to actually generate value after that? And I would say yes, because art, true works of art, creating beauty by definition has a value. It has a transcendental value. So a woman that, say, after she can't reproduce, she could create art, she could create things with actual use and value to it, and because she's able to do these things, she herself is more valuable than something that can't. So I think that would be my main refutation to this point that reproduction, and since it's the basis of natural law for the purpose of humans, that would be my refutation to it, that something that's valuable by definition is good, and since we can generate value even without the capability of reproduction, yes, a person that can reproduce is more valuable. However, there's still value to be had. Thus, it would be a moral wrong to destroy something that can generate values, because absence of value is, less valuable than presence of value. What would you say to that?
Well, I would actually agree quite a bit to the concepts of value. Again, I would say that that's a subjective concept of what is and what is not valuable. But I would also argue on the side of duty-based ethics. And honestly, I think that it's very applicable to Nietzschean theory, because, not to say that I'm like a Nietzschean or something, right? Like, it's like that's a box to be put in. And I think that goes against the whole concept of philosophy of growing and evolving, specifically Germanic thought processes of reading the person that is your predecessor and evolving the concepts beyond them. Because as much as I enjoy Nietzsche's theories, I do think that it needs to be expounded upon and evolved. And as a German, I feel like I have a certain right to be able to do that. So, and to evolve upon previous Germans. But the concepts of duty, right? And I agree that there should be a duty basis towards things in our subject. Like, we have a duty to uphold natural law and order, right? Like, we have a duty to go for that which is good. And as I explained earlier, what was
But
good.
do you think we have a duty to generate this transcendental value?
Well, okay, so
just do we, let's say, as a people, have a duty to generate true works of art, to generate beauty?
I don't think we have a duty to do so, but I do think that it's good to do so. I don't think that it's a duty that we have to do these things. Now, I mean, yeah. All right. So yes, there's. Okay. So yeah, no, there's no real duty. There's no objective duty, to create art, right? There's no objective duty to create art, in my opinion. But I think that art's great. Art's amazing. I love art. I think that it's something that it's a foundational keystone to our culture and our civilization, and the glorification of that. And that's kind of where I place art, is not that it is not that it's some kind of moral good or something, but it exemplifies that which is a moral good, right? Like, it's a celebration of a moral good. Well, good art is, anyway. Obviously, we can get into, we can have another 3-hour discussion.
We're just assuming. That's why I put the qualifier of true works of art. I mean, there's very little value in the crucifix in the jar of piss, but there is a lot of value in the Last Supper, the actual painting.
Yes, I agree. But the thing is that glorifies, and honestly, I would argue, as far as religious works are concerned, although, like, putting someone's passion into it, I think that I believe that there is intrinsic value to good art, but not in the terms that we were discussing earlier with purpose and meaning. I think that it has to be removed from that because it does fall under meaning. It doesn't fall under purpose. It exemplifies good, and that's what gives it value, in my opinion. Is that art has immeasurable value when it exemplifies moral good, when it shows the beauty of nature, when it shows us and portrays to us the objective good that is natural order and law. Like when we have, great works of heroes and the human form actually is probably my favorite example of this for sculpture. Right, sculpture is probably.
I'm a sucker in particular for marble statues. I absolutely wish we would bring more marble statues back into the public. I mean, see things like David. What's
Yes.
what's the one famous armless statue?
Are you talking about the Winged Victory in France, or
Probably.
she doesn't have a head either? But
yeah,
the
that's the
Winged
one.
Victory is probably one of the most significant pieces of I'm pretty sure it's Hellenistic statues.
But getting back to my quick little interruption, from listening to this, it sounds like you would disagree with Emerson's concept of art. That's the actual witnessing of the art that generates the value, not the art itself. For example, do you think there's any value to a painting that isn't seen by the public? Say that there is a painting that the artist makes and he leaves it in his attic. Was there any value created by that art being created?
This would we'd have to hash out what we mean by value. Obviously, I don't think we're talking about monetary value here. We're talking about intrinsic value.
Of course not.
Okay. So the value of it, then yes, if that art exemplifies an objective good, then I think that it does have value, regardless if anybody sees it or not, because that it exists, as Schopenhauer would say, a thing in itself. It just simply exists. It exists, and because it's art, right? Like because it exists at that point, it becomes an objective thing. It just is, right? It exists. And because it exists, and because it exemplifies a moral good, because it exemplifies objective truth, regardless if anybody sees it or not, it exists within itself objectively with value. Yes.
I completely agree. And we've been going for an hour and 40 minutes now, so I think now would be a good time to close out. Next time I see Uber, I'm going to scold him, and hopefully we can get him back for the next episode. It's been a pleasure talking to you about Blade Runner and existentialism.
Yeah. Also, there's a good book we should probably pick up next time, which is a theory of transcendental idealism is a good one, I believe.
Yes, indeed. So thank you all for watching, everyone, and we'll see you all next time.